Righteousness. Righteousness. But by the way, just asterisk, if you were, nobody was just here for the first time last week, but if you're watching this ever, I am so not Gertie, and I'm not going to try to be, but what an awesome presentation that Pastor Gertie shared with us last week about the gospel. So anyway, righteousness. Gertie talked about it. It's kind of a churchy word, right? Kind of a religious word. I am going to guess that you haven't been sitting around your dinner table or your office or the bar talking about righteousness in this last week. I'm going to guess that is probably true. But for those of us who adhere to the Christian faith, the core of everything that we believe hinges on the gospel, in which the Apostle Paul says reveals the righteousness of God. So how important is it that God is a God of righteousness? He's not just kind of righteous. Like, he's 100% righteous through and through. Did you also know that the only way, and I thought Gertie really shared this well last week, the only way for us to experience life with God here on earth and forever is to also be 100% righteous. Did you know that? Brother Gertie talked about it last week, how Jesus took the guilt of our rap sheet, and he illustrated that really well, wrapping his rap sheet in the us doll and then in the Jesus doll, and illustrated how Jesus took our rap sheet, our sin and our guilt upon his body so that we could be righteous. Through the cross and what Jesus did for us, we can know him and be restored back to him here and now and forever. So, my friends, brothers and sisters, this study, as we dig into Romans, it's so crucial to understanding the Christian life and how to live it out in our day-to-day lives. So with that said, let's listen to what God says. I'm going to try to be faithful to only communicate that. What he has to say to us this morning through his word about his righteousness and how we should respond. So let's pick up in verse 16 to catch the context. Again, Romans 1:16. I shared a message on that 2 weeks ago. Crucial 2 verses in the New Testament, Romans 1:16 and 17. Paul said this, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who what? Believes," right? And I shared with you, and I say this often, I don't like the word belief. I don't really even like the word faith, because it's hard to understand. What does it mean to believe? We believe a lot of things. We have faith in a lot of things. And so I just like to replace, whenever you see believe or faith in the Bible, I like to replace it. Not that I'm replacing it with my word, but what I'm saying is what the Bible is trying to communicate, what Paul was trying to communicate, is a trust. I'm putting my trust in something outside of myself, and that is the action of faith, in which brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew and then to the Gentile. Then he said this in verse 17. For is it, not to geek out, but the Greek word gar there is often translated for, but it's really because. So the last part of 16, the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Gentile, or first to the Jew, then to the Gentile, because in the gospel the righteousness of God is revealed. So it's pretty important that we understand what in the world that righteousness of God is, right? This is a righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. The righteous will live by faith. The gospel that reveals the righteousness of God is pretty important. So he says because, right? For, or because, the reason the gospel is God's saving power is that it is God's righteousness that is revealed in it. Moreover, this righteousness is from faith to faith. Or, I like the NIV here, I think it's really accurate. By faith from first to last. And closes with the famous quote from Habakkuk 2:4. So we're going to look at all of those aspects here. These 2 verses are the thesis of the book of Romans, and likely the linchpins of the entire Christian faith. We're going to ask 3 questions. We're going to ask and answer 3 questions here this morning. so we have a full understanding of what Paul is saying as we journey through this book. First of all, what is the righteousness of God? Secondly, what did Paul mean? A righteousness that is by faith from first to last. And third, how should we take this quote from Habakkuk, the righteous will live by faith? The righteous will live by faith. What does that mean? So first, what is the righteousness of God? Now, there's no way for me to cover this in such a short amount of time. There's so much written about this. But I'm going to give my best to give enough, at least, of an overview so you can walk away feeling like you understand it. First, some emphasize that the righteousness of God is a divine attribute or quality, and it is, in a sense. In this case, righteousness describes God's character together with his actions, which are in keeping with his actions. So he's righteous, so he does righteousness. He always does what is right. Throughout Romans, Paul goes to great lengths to defend the righteous character and actions of God. That's true. Whatever God does in judgment, if God judges me, he's righteous and he's just to judge me. And in salvation, he is righteous and just to pronounce those whom he wants to pronounce righteous or unrighteous. Absolutely consistent with his character. In Romans 2:5, in judgment, listen to what Paul said, but because of your stubbornness and your unrepentant heart, you are storing up wrath against yourself for the day of God's wrath when his righteous judgment will be revealed. Gertie last week, I think, did a really good job talking about the wrath of God. Please show up next Sunday, because next Sunday we're going to get into verse 18 and 19, which Paul introduces this whole topic of the wrath of God. I think that'll be very, very relevant. So, God is righteous. He is just when he pronounces judgment on those who are wicked. And we were all in line. I was first, but you were probably somewhere in line before you put your faith in Jesus, or if you haven't put your faith in Jesus, here's the difference. Those who put their faith in Jesus fall under the wrath of God, and those who put their faith in Jesus do not. And we're going to see why that is as he unpacks this. So hold on to that, because I know that is heavy. In chapter 3, verses 25 and 26, in salvation God is righteous. Listen to what Paul said. God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement, a covering, through the shedding of his blood. We're going to celebrate communion here this morning and remember all of these things again. To be received by faith. He did this to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his forbearance he had left the sins committed beforehand unpunished. So a lot of people died and their sin was not punished. And it was unpunished until Jesus took those sins and dealt with it. So looking back, we can say as well, as those before Christ were looking ahead to what God promised was going to happen, and we're looking back and saying, oh, he did it already. He did it to demonstrate his righteousness at the present time so as to be just and the one who justifies those who have faith in Jesus. My friends, there's nothing that you can do to justify yourself. You can't be good enough. You can't be righteousness enough, because the standard would have been from your birth to be perfectly righteous from that day until today. And the bad news is that we couldn't even do that before we got to church today. I know I couldn't. I had to ask forgiveness already this morning for thoughts that I had already this morning about other people that were different than me, that cheer for another team. By the way, I meant to say this before this was recorded, but now, since this is being recorded, let's just make it clear. I was thinking about this as I was driving in. This is Quince Orchard High School community. And Brother Miguel knows that we value unity in diversity, do we not? And I'm not making light of this, but one way is within sports, right? So I root for a certain team here in Washington. Miguel roots for a certain team in Dallas. My friend, we love each other. We're brothers. We can root for different teams, We're never enemies. I say if we actually put on the uniform, we're enemies on the field, but we're brothers off the field. I mean, we're not that we're brothers on the field. So anyway, in case you haven't heard, on Friday, Ephraim as the starting linebacker, and Emmett was suited up, didn't get to play, but Ephraim had probably his best game. And in order to be the man, you have to beat the man. And we beat the number one Quince Orchard Cougars. So if you're out there, Cougar Land, we welcome you. We'll comfort you. I mean, we're half joking. And not to minimize, obviously, it's never fun to lose. But, man, we've been losing for 3 years, and it's nice to win. So congrats to F and the Jags. I don't know where I was going with that. But Some emphasize the righteousness of God as a divine attribute or quality, but secondly, others stress the righteousness of God as a divine activity, namely the fact that he intervened to provide salvation. His salvation and his righteousness are frequently coupled in the parallelism of Hebrew poetry, which you may care nothing about, but I love seeing this in Hebrew poetry. I spent, years studying this, and I just love it. And sometimes it's easy to overlook, but I want you to see two examples in the Psalms and in Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 40 to 66, you see it filled in there. But first, for example, Psalm 98 verse 2. Look at this. The Lord has made his salvation known. That's the first line. He's made his salvation known. That's broad, but now he's going to zero in. And revealed his righteousness to the nations. That's more specific. He's revealed his righteousness to the nations. Really? How did he do that to the nations? Well, he did it, and he put what he did on public display, and then he sent the people who saw it and witnessed it to the utter ends of the earth to proclaim it. And you and me are part of the fulfillment of that as well. Or Isaiah 46:13, notice, I am bringing my righteousness near. It is not far away. I'm bringing it as near. It is not far away. Now notice how he leans in and focuses the attention. And my salvation will not be delayed. I will grant salvation to Zion, my splendor to Israel. So these ideas of righteousness and salvation are coupled together, and we see it here in these two examples. N.T. Wright adds, I like N.T. Wright on many things, and this is one of them. We don't agree on everything, but I do like him in this. Quote, he said this, the righteousness of God is essentially the covenant faithfulness, the covenant justice of the God who made promises to Abraham, promises of a worldwide family characterized by faith, in and through whom the evil of the world would be undone, unquote. Beautiful. So, thirdly, as John Stott, I quote John Stott a lot in Romans, as John Stott put it, the righteousness of God is revealed in the gospel is a divine achievement. So it's characterizing him in one way, it's what he's done in salvation, and here, thirdly, it's a divine achievement. He takes it as, quote, a righteousness from God, as the NIV has it. Listen to how Paul describes this in Philippians 3, verse 9. Again, we're trying to ask and answer, what is the righteousness of God? Philippians 3, 9. And be found in him, this is, he's been saying a number of things. And be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, or trying to be good enough, right? Trying to keep the rules, the law. But, he's emphasizing a different kind of righteousness. But that which is through faith in Christ, right? Again, what do we want to replace with faith? Trust, right? Trust, you're trusting in what Jesus did, not what you can do. The righteousness that comes from God on the basis of faith, trust. I'm going to sit without looking, right? You sat down, probably you probably did this, and you just want to make sure you're back there, but you didn't check the chair. Oh, I don't know. I don't know if that one's going to hold me. Let me check this one, No, I just want to make sure it's there so I don't fall, but I'm just going to have faith that the seat is going to hold me. And when we have a moment where we don't believe in Jesus, or maybe we believe in our mind and even in our heart, but we haven't trusted him to make me righteous. When we go over that line into I'm now trusting what he did, and I'm no longer trusting in myself, in my own righteousness, I've now sat on the chair of faith. I'm not as good at object lessons as Gertie, but there's the chair object lesson. Charles Cranfield holds this interpretation and paraphrases 1:17 in this way. Listen to this. I think this is helpful. This is a paraphrase of Romans 1:17. For in it, in the gospel, as it is being preached, a righteous status, which is God's gift, is being revealed, and so offered to men, a righteous status, which is altogether by faith. So we can say this morning, greetings, righteous ones. Not because you walked in with a white cloak because your deeds have been righteous, but because you have accepted the bread and body of Jesus and what he has done for you. This goes well with 2 Corinthians 5:21. Paul said this, God made him who had no sin, Jesus, to be sin for us, or on our behalf, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. In him. I might become the righteousness of God? Not in Ed. There's no way, because even my greatest righteousness is like a filthy rag to God. But in him, in Jesus, in what he has done, because I'm acknowledging, in humility, I'm acknowledging that God has done what I couldn't do. I'm humbling myself to that truth, and it is that action, that trust, that gives me a righteous standing before God. So then the righteousness of God can be thought of as a divine attribute. Our God is a righteous God. Or in activity, he comes to our rescue. He's righteous in that way. Or in achievement, he bestows on us a righteous status. So in other words, what is righteousness? It is a quality, an activity, and a gift from God. What is the righteousness of God? It is a quality, it is an activity, and it is a gift from God, as simply as we can state it. Brothers and sisters, this is good news. In and of ourselves, we have no righteousness and no way to become righteous. Jesus was and is the righteousness of God and our only hope of righteousness in this world. So let us give thanks to God for this hope and this message of hope for the world around us. Now, let's ask and answer, what did Paul mean, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last? What does that mean? I'm glad you asked. Back to Romans 1:17. Let me read it again. Because in the gospel the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. So the righteousness of God, which is revealed in the gospel and offered to us through Jesus, a righteousness of which God is the source, is literally out of faith into faith, or from faith to faith. The NIV has by faith from first to last. What in the world is Paul saying there? What does he mean? Was Paul describing the way that God has revealed his righteousness, or how his people should receive it? There's a big difference. What God has done, or what we are to do. That is a big difference. The phrase by faith from first to last most likely refers to how people receive God's righteousness. The idea seems to be that faith is the method whereby we receive salvation, whatever aspect of salvation may be in view, or whomever we may be. In this case, the NIV interpretation is probably correct. By faith, from the first moment to the last moment. Your righteousness, your standing of being righteous before God, my standing of being righteous before God is by faith from the first moment, and in that first moment, it is salvation from the penalty of sin in the past. And that is by faith from that moment all the way until I breathe my very last, and between that moment and the day I breathe my last, my faith is in the fact that God is saving me right now from the power of sin. And we'll talk about that here in a minute as we close this. This is where the rubber hits the road. My struggle with whether or not I believe God, whether or not I trust God, whether or not I'm following him and living him, hinges on, very simply, am I waking up today and continuing to live my life by faith from the first to the last? Hopefully that makes sense. It's completely by faith, in other words. This leads us to the last phrase. The last phrase of verse 17, and the last question we need to ask and answer: how should we take this quote from Habakkuk that the righteous will live by faith? Brothers and sisters, this is so important. This is the crux of our whole existence as Christians. Faith is the vehicle that brings the righteousness of God to people. The person who believes the good news that this righteous God has proclaimed themselves. The righteous God has proclaimed because righteousness himself. I'm sorry. It's been an intense weekend. For some reason, my words and my brain are not really connecting. Let me try it again. The person who believes the good news that the righteous God has proclaimed becomes righteous himself or herself, not because of what they have done, but because what they are proclaiming. The prophet Habakkuk had complained. The context is key, right? The prophet Habakkuk had complained that God intended to raise up the ruthless Babylonians to punish Israel. I mean, boy, that's a pretty relevant topic today as we think about what is going on in Israel and around the world. How could God use the wicked to judge the wicked? I mean, he did that throughout the history of the world, really. Through exile, anyway. He used the Assyrians and the Babylonians, at least. Very wicked. Those are probably the two most wicked cultures ever. The Assyrians and the Babylonians. God promised his people that if they acted wicked, he was going to send judgment. And the way that God did it was he sent wicked people. I don't know exactly that there's a one-to-one parallel in what we might experience here today, but I simply want to encourage us to think about, if God did that then what kind of methods and modes might God use to bring influence upon our lives or influence around the world even? I mean, as we're seeing events unfold, is God in it? I mean, certainly, to some degree, right? So how could God use the wicked to judge the wicked? Habakkuk was told that where the proud Babylonians would fall, the righteous Israelite would live by his faith. That is, in the context, by his humble, steadfast trust in God. In other words, you wicked people, Israel, who they're not putting their trust in God, they're turning to idols, they're turning to false worship. And what Habakkuk is saying is, God's people, humble yourself and turn back to God, because the righteous live by faith, and they weren't living by faith. How were they not living by faith? The evil in their lives was primarily unbelief. And we see the writer of Hebrews really unpacking that. We don't have time to get into that. But the writer of Hebrews says that their wickedness, their evil in the time of wandering was evil. What was so evil was their unbelief. And then the writer of Hebrews says, as long as it is today, today is the day of salvation. Today is the day to have faith. Today is the day for the righteous to live by faith, or trust, right? Trust in God. So then, those who are made righteous by faith also live by faith. Having begun in faith, they continue along the same path. This also fits with the expression from faith to faith, which stresses that the Christian life is by faith from the beginning to the end. Romans 1:16 and verse 17 are key verses in Romans as they state the theme of the entire letter, the gospel, which is the message that can deliver everyone who believes. Everyone who believes. I had some interaction in the last 24 hours, and I just want to confess this to you. Can I do that for a moment? You know, when you're a parent, many of you are parents in here, we can get crazy about our kids sometimes, right? Sometimes positively, sometimes negatively. We want our kids to succeed, and sometimes when our kids succeed, it's great, and sometimes when they fail, it's bad, and whether that's in sports or academics or whatever path in life, it could be something silly, it could be making friends, whatever it is, but we get really intense, and so you guys know I'm pretty intense when it comes to football and my kids. And I refrained. God really helped me and gave me grace this last week, and I told Ephraim too, we are not talking trash. We're going to respect the game, we're going to respect our opponent, and we're going to respect ourselves as well. Now, there's a place to tell the truth. And so they won 39 games in a row, and we beat them. And there was some interaction there. And I will say, props to the mayor. Mayor, if you ever see this. The mayor goes on and on. He's a big advocate for QO. He personally messaged me, in public, but said, hey, Ed, right after the game, great game. Your son played a great game. Congrats. Now go bring home the state title. Awesome. And I told him, that means so much. That was classy. And it wasn't all classy, and I called some of it out. And a friend, I'm just going to say this publicly because the comments were all public. If you want to go look at them, feel free to do that on Twitter. And someone messaged me that was a friend that got called out and was like, is that what you would tell your church? Or should I come to your church and tell them what you said? So, brothers and sisters, you can see everything that I said. And basically, I was just calling out some of the actions of the head coach right after the game and some of the players. And I was just calling it out. Like, I wasn't talking trash before. And I said to everyone who I had some interaction with who was talking trash to me, because there was a lot of that, and I said, hey, QO wins. Bro, I'll be right on here. I'll be the first one to give respect. So I just wanted to say that. Just let you guys know, Pastor Ed, got into it a little bit. And I was thinking about, and when I say got into it, like I feel, I read through everything again this morning and was like, nah, Lord, I don't really take anything back. What I need to be careful of is just stay focused. Don't get involved in conflicts and arguing and all that. And brothers and sisters, whether we're on one side or the other, like we are promoting unity among diversity. And that is so important. And so here, this is the centerpiece of the gospel. It's why we believe it with all of our heart, that we really believe that people that can disagree about politics, they can disagree about sports, they can disagree about a lot of things except one thing, and that is where we are putting our hope and trust to be righteous. And it is not in ourselves, it is in the Lord Jesus. This is a message about a righteous God who makes unrighteous people righteous by faith. From the first to the last, from the beginning to the end. God, have mercy on me. Pray for me as we navigate these waters. I told the men's group on Wednesday, I said, would pray for me because this game is a big deal to my kids. It's a big deal to me, and I just want to represent Jesus through all of that. Sometimes, I do it better than others. So let's put some skin on this as we land the plane this morning. What is faith? I like to define faith as amending. It's amending our thoughts and our feelings and our actions to what God says. That's the simplest way I can tell you to understand faith. It's galvanizing what we're thinking about my wife or my kids or my neighbor or my friend or my work or my frustrations or the things that I see in the world, about the news, about all these things, money, frustration, traffic, all these things. When I'm thinking about those things, and then I have some feelings about those things, and then I have some actions, and I'm saying, God, I'm trying to think thoughts that align themselves with what you say. Because if you say to love my enemy, I think QO is our enemy. So then I need to love the people who we're arch rivals. We believe, both teams believe that the other side has some character issues. Go figure. So I'm like, okay, Lord. My thoughts, my feelings, my actions need to better reflect what you say. So that's how it relates to Pastor Ed. And would you just pray that I am a pastor and a dad of a football player, and I'll be on the field Friday night. Pray that I'm representing. I can't tell you how many times I'm literally on the sideline and a coach or someone just drops a big F-bomb, and then they look at me and they're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." Like, I never said, I don't know why you would say that to me. Everybody knows, I'm a pastor. I'm like, dude, just be yourself. I'm not your judge. But the righteous judge, that's the one don't worry about me. Like, you're not answering to me, man. The one who's going to judge you and me, that's the one we should be trembling before. So, my friends, brothers and sisters, how important is what God says to you? I don't say that I'm not coming down on you. But that's what I want us to wrestle with. How important is what God says to you? As we move forward, toward a time of reflection here in these last few minutes around the communion table, I just want to encourage you to wrestle with the importance of God's word in your life. Paul says here the righteous are to live by faith, and if what that means is that it has to do with the way we think and feel and act in relation to God's word, let's just wrestle with that. There are times when I really, can I say it this way? Like, I suck at that. I'm sorry, I know that I'm just terrible at, where I just don't. I give in to my feelings. I give in to some lie that I have bought into rather than the truth. And then I feel a certain way, and then I act a certain way. God, forgive me. Talk to God about it. Ask him to help your faith, just like the father who brought his son to Jesus in Mark 9. The son who had been tormented by demons his whole life. Listen to what Jesus said and how the man responded. But if you can do anything, this is the man talking to Jesus. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. If you can, said Jesus. Oh, how often I just resonate with that. If you can? He's talking to Jesus. And he says, Jesus, if you can. And Jesus is like, if you can? Everything is possible for one who believes. What do we replace with believe? Not just believing, but for everyone who trusts. Everything is possible for one who trusts in the Word of God, the promise of God, right? Immediately. Oh, God, that we would have this response. Immediately, the boy's father exclaimed, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. That's a prayer that might be helpful for us today and this week. We believe, but Lord, help me overcome my unbelief. We have faith. We believe we are righteous before God by faith, and we are to walk and live by faith, yet we struggle to actually do so. I'm sure we all do. I'm sure you would agree. Lord, help us overcome our unbelief and live by faith today. I'm going to lead us in prayer, and then we're going to celebrate communion. I'm going to give some instructions, and then we'll take the elements together, and Sergio will lead a song of response and reflection after that. So let me pray. We'll walk through communion. We'll take the elements together, and then we'll sing one more song.